Okay, great. So this will probably be a short video to complete this these set of slides. But we've gone through working one, working two, and working three. Um, yes, here we are. We've talked about working one, working two. All we're doing is creating it, if you see here, and a framework of mechanics. We have 5 steps. Working one, we talked about group structure. Working two, we talked about this focus on the subsidiary and its movements, so we could actually work out, in effect, what any growth had been over that period. So we could take that growth and add it onto the parent, and we can show those movements within the parent, if you like, through this replacement. Yes, placement of its investment, replacement of the investment with the assets and liabilities, the corresponding assets and liabilities, and show those movements. So as you're having those movements, you're also having movements in the equity section as well. And then we had working three, where we talked about this idea of goodwill that suddenly arises as a result of acquiring this subsidiary, because you've paid more than you ordinarily would. So we're not just bringing in the physical assets, you might have paid more, and we'll see how that plays out. And we talked about the mechanism behind that, and I talked about for fairness. So this took up a bit of time in my video. This bit here of bringing in the non-controlling asset and treating it as though it's a full 100% to compare it with the full 100% of the business to work out what goodwill was. Okay, great. And this is really a journal, ultimately, when I say the impairment, because I talked earlier on about how and assets can fall in value, and so you must also see the change in the equity section, which is where we see this change. I mean, this is just a layout, but this is really a journal. Ultimately, they're all journals. Right, okay. So then working for, now again, working for, and we'll see, and I will go through an illustration. This is just a theory. Working for is this idea of the non-controlling interest. Again, the non-controlling interest arises because your investment is not in is not for, if your investment is not for the entirety of the business. So we need to include, when I say we need to include, you see what I mean. It's not just like we're just sticking it in there. It's there. These are valid journals, and I'll show you them in your equity section. And as you can imagine, I mean, I'll show you, but as you can imagine, the argument is we can't imagine you owned 80% of the business and that was your investment, right? And you have A minus L. I mean, because you control it, you can't say, I'm going to take out this 80%, and I'm only going to bring in 80% of A and 80% of L. It doesn't really make any sense. You have to bring in the 100% of these A's and L's because you control them. So in effect, if you're bringing in the 100% A's and L's, we almost need to look for a mechanism to also kind of, because you can't take out 80% and replace it with 100%, right? You will have a difference, right? Because you'll be taking out 80, bringing in 100. So ultimately, we need to, and really, what is that 20%? That 20% is a non-controlling interest. So in effect, we need to compensate or bring it in and show it as part of our own equity. But we'll see examples of that. So you might have caught it exactly from what I just said there, but that's really what's going on, if you like. And just like working two will show the growth in the whole organization, that growth, some of that growth will also be before the non-controlling interest. So you will have the non-controlling interest at acquisition. So it's got its own it's got its own working. It's got its own working number. That's working for, right? And so working for says, okay, listen, what's the non-controlling interest value at acquisition? Because you're usually given this. I mean, you're given this, and then you have it now. And like I said, we look at working two, and we see what's the growth. I'll just go to it just because. We say, well, what's the change? What's been the change from one year to the next? So we know what the change is. You might own 80%. The parent will own 80%. There's 20% via the acquisition. Well, we must give the 20% the acquisition. We must give the non-controlling interest its own share of that profit. Oops, sorry, where was I? Here we are. We must give them their own share of that profit, and then of course, because as I said earlier on, because we brought them in as sort of as being part of us, they share as well in any um, impairment in the goodwill. Again, it's like anything, right? All we're doing is A is equal to C plus L. Good things happen, A goes up. Bad things happen, that goes down, because within A we're now recognizing goodwill. That's all we're doing. Right, okay. And working five, if you like, is really the parent. We're looking at the parent, and the parent's always had its own big earnings. Now we're literally adding on, if you like, from working two, yes, the its own share of the post acquisition profits, adding that on, if you like. I mean, I keep saying adding it on. Ultimately, I'm any new movements in A minus L, as you would expect, will lead to a movement in C ultimately, and that increase in C, it must have its own share. Great. And it's easier to have, it says here, easier to have a working to include. Yeah, it's just better. So, and then of course, any impairments as well, it will suffer. So typically working five tends to look at like parent company's profits plus its share of the subsidiary, less any impairments, if you like, that have happened during the year. This will look like this. Retained post-ac and piece share of any impairment. And again, like I said, with goodwill, what we are doing, if you like, is we recognize this goodwill as an intangible, and it is tested annually for impairment. And we don't, yeah, I mean, we don't kind of do this kind of we don't say goodwill will last for 10 years or something like that. No, no, no. Every year we look at what's going on and then reevaluate, so to speak, and see if it's still worth it, still worth what it is. And most of the time it does fall in value. It's rare that it ever stays the same. And it's rare. I haven't seen any questions where goodwill actually increases. Um, Great. And this is what I was saying earlier on. We must reflect that fall, and typically we have the two methods. The fair value method, we just have the fall across both. But the argument really is that if you're using the second method, this proportion of net assets method, not popular but examined anyway, this is where we're almost giving the goodwill, or the goodwill just belongs to the parent. So of course, debit retained earnings, which is the fall in goodwill, which is working five, and if you like, credit the intangible of goodwill. But here is where we're not sharing any of that goodwill with the non-controlling interest. Rare though. Let me see what's left. Oh, great, there's one more slide left. Or the fair value method, which is what I think is more popular, or more you're more likely to get asked, or is where we debit the group, both reserves, both parent and non-controlling interest get hit, if you like. So fall in both their retained earnings and a fall in goodwill as well, which is typically what we expect. So great. So what we'll go through and do now is look at I have some illustrations anyway, and then we'll go on and do TYU 1 and 2.